A demonic threat loomed over the brave swordsman, which even he could not resist. The tired swordsman, leaning on his weapon, was the only one among the surviving warriors in this battle. The girl who created the magic sphere stated that her opponent was rightfully called the Emperor of the Blade. And when her attack was ready, the swordsman's enemy, raising her hand with the sphere above her head, announced that today she would deprive the warrior of his title. Wiping the blood from his chin, the man replied with annoyance that he had wanted to relax, but he was not allowed to do that either. Looking at his opponent, the swordsman said that since he had accomplished his goal, the girl could finish him off. The evil sorceress launched the very same sphere that she had been holding in her palm just a second ago at the desperate warrior. The swordsman, despite the approaching magic ball, met his death without flinching, with his head held high. The collision resulted in a huge explosion that should have left no trace of the valiant warrior. The girl, watching the actions she had performed, asked her opponent not to be so serious, although she herself smiled maliciously. But as soon as the smoke from the blow cleared, the witch was shocked, as she did not expect to see something like this. The girl was surprised because the swordsman stood up to defend him, and John easily repelled her attack, thus saving his comrade. Covered in sweat, the boy apologized for being late, claiming that everything would be taken care of now. Before the man could object, his savior jumped up and headed straight towards the evil witch. Watching John, the warrior said that he had been counting heavily on his abilities, which were vital in this situation. Appearing against the backdrop of the full moon, the young swordsman gave rise to many questions in the girl, namely, who he was. John, with a wild gleam in his eyes, answered his opponent that he was none other than her death, the lunar sage. And when the guy raised his blade over his head, he explained to the witch that he was the swordsman who cut the moon. After these words were spoken, the warrior's savior inflicted multiple wounds on the enemy, with just one swing of his sword, cutting her into pieces. At that moment, evil spirits in the form of dragons appeared from the witch, screaming furiously, showing everyone their sharp fangs. The girl who was fighting with the brave warrior screamed loudly because she was defeated and could do nothing to save herself. With a satisfied grin, the man watched the overall victory, namely, how their enemy left this world forever. Admiring his disciple, the man was sure that 9 streams of sword energy had fallen from the sky that day. John was such a skilled swordsman that he was finally able to put an end to the evil deeds of the insidious sorceress. And while the young warrior was hovering among the clouds, his comrade watched his triumph from the ground. 6 years have passed since this decisive battle, and the story continues, shifting its focus to the Vareng estate. A little boy living in the estate was once again slapped by his stepmother. And after another such blow from the woman, Yoka finally couldn't take it anymore and simply fell to the ground. She, breaking into a shout, ordered the boy to become more serious and get up, reminding him that an important guest was supposed to arrive today. Rising to his feet, shaking all over, the young man replied that he remembered this, but his stepmother asked again whether he had really ignored her instructions. The woman ordered the boy to clean up the backyard, but the young man failed to do so and was now standing next to a broken broom. The lady, bending over the boy, asked whether he ignored her only because she was not his real mother. The stepmother insisted that if the mother, who left Joha after his birth, or the father, who did not leave the room for 6 years, had given the task, the boy would have quickly completed it. But having heard only one negative answer to all her questions, the woman became furious, as she considered this to be a boy's rebellion. The stepmother decided to teach the little brat a lesson by giving him another round of slaps right in front of the other children who were nearby. The younger brother and sister asked to pay attention to how their relative was so scared that, like a turtle, he could not even lift his head. However, Maibek was not at all amused by this picture, and, watching his mother's actions, he felt sympathy for the guilty boy. Meanwhile, the carriage with the guests was already not far from the Vareng estate, who were eager to see the head of the family's adopted brother, Uncle Jan. The girl with expensive earrings listened attentively, as her mother worried about where her daughter had disappeared to. When the mother found out that the girl had settled on the roof of the carriage again, she was hysterical, because she had asked Namgung not to do that, fearing that she would break her legs. The girl's mother looked out of the carriage and ordered her daughter to immediately come down from the roof. However, the father asked to leave his daughter alone, and the son confirmed that his sister would not get hurt, given her level of martial arts. The boy, in turn, wanted to hear more about Uncle Yan, who, according to rumors, was so strong that even his father, the Blade Emperor, recognized the warrior's strength. The man replied that the swordsmanship that John had demonstrated several years ago was perfect in every way. If it weren't for him, Lord Namgung would be dead, and the Nine Heavens sword technique could compete with even their most advanced techniques. The son could not believe that his uncle had such amazing power, finding it strange that no one knew about the swordsman. The warrior retired without passing on his knowledge, and warned the emperors not to speak to Yan about anything that might offend him. The swordsman had 2 wives, but he loved only one of them especially strongly, which could not help but make the other jealous. Unfortunately, the love of his life died after giving birth, which happened almost during the victory over the witch, and since then, John has lost the meaning of life. The man locked himself in his second wife's room, so the emperor, being at the estate, wanted to somehow get him out of there. Mr. Namgung insisted that when they arrived at the estate, no one should mention his second wife, and act as if no one knew anything. Running to the lady, who was loudly shouting her name, the servant reported that the master had left his room. The wife, who could not believe it, asked the employee again whether her husband had really left the room. The man replied that Yan had personally wanted to meet the representatives from the Namgung clan as soon as he learned that the carriage carrying them had entered the village. The servant handed the lady a towel so that she could wipe her bloody hand, which she had gotten dirty during the educational work on it. The woman said that she begged him to come out, but he did not even look in her direction, having rejected his own blood, but decided to meet his adopted brother. The stepmother turned to the boy who was lying on the ground at that moment, who finally had the opportunity to see his father. With a wild, frightening gaze, Miju asked if the boy thought he would meet his father in such a pitiful state. Rising with difficulty, the young man replied that he would under no circumstances catch his eye while in such a state. The woman was pleased that the boy began to understand how he should behave, asking Joey whether her son knew where he needed to go. The lady claimed that the boy should not have been seen by other people if he did not want to disgrace the family. The stepmother insisted that she would find out in any case if Yoa started doing whatever he wanted. The lady turned to her children and asked them if they were ready to meet their uncle. The young man said that he would think about his behavior, after which he resolutely headed off in an unknown direction. Mybek's gaze lingered for a moment on one of the brothers, who was not at all held in high esteem by his mother. The lady, in order to distract her son from the boy she hated, approached him with a very important task. The young man needed to meet his uncle's daughter Namgung Yeon, and when they met, he would definitely become friends with her. Squeezing her son's shoulders even harder, the woman asked again if Mybek understood what exactly she meant. Looking at his mother, the young man promised to do everything so that she would be happy with him, remembering how his half-brother got it. When John met the guests, his adopted brother noticed how the great warrior had changed in appearance, after which he introduced his wife and children. The lady introduced herself as Jang Hyun, and the son of the Blade Emperor bowed and announced his name, Namgung Jeon. Bowing, the boy was surprised that in front of him was indeed his uncle, about whom he had heard so much. A man with a thin face and a lush beard announced that he was glad to see his daughter-in-law as his guest. Having received praise from the owner of the house, Chong was surprised that his relative was different from how the young man imagined him to be. The young man was confused when his mother, holding back her laughter, also stated that she was glad to meet the gentleman whom she had finally seen with her own eyes. But just as Mrs. Haeun was about to introduce her daughter to Namgung Yeon, she discovered that the girl had disappeared. The woman immediately apologized to John for her daughter, and the owner of the house took it quite normally, citing the age of the young girl. John's wife suddenly announced that their fourth son also constantly ran away and did not show up, asking her husband to introduce them to the guests. Without any enthusiasm, the man pointed to his family and simply replied that his wife and children were in front of the guests. The woman introduced herself as Baek Miju, noting that Namgung was tired after a long journey and wanted to rest. Went inside the estate with his family and adopted brother. However, Miju immediately turned to her eldest son, instructing him to walk around and look for Namgung Yeon. Bending over him, the mother reminded Baek that he had to make a good impression on the girl. The mother's face took on a sinister hue again, and she asked the young man again if he had understood everything that had been said to him. Quite a lot of time had passed since then, and the sun had already begun to set, but the poor boy still held his hands up. The only thing the guy was thinking about was when these guests would leave, because of whom he had to hide in this part of the yard. John's son hoped that the strangers would return home soon, as his arms were beginning to ache unbearably. But as luck would have it, on top of everything else, the boy's stomach began to rumble because he was exhausted and wanted to eat. Joey's eyes began to close little by little, but he should not fall under any circumstances, otherwise he would be punished. With the thought that his mother would punish him, the boy could not stand it, and nevertheless lay down on the ground, unable to hold on any longer. Easily the boy, snoring, attracted a man walking around the estate to his person. Descending from the trees in which she was hiding, a stranger approached the sleeping boy. But even when she found herself next to the sleeping boy, he continued to snore soundly. But at some point the young man came to his senses and looked with sleepy eyes at the man who appeared in front of him. And the very next second, having discovered a female silhouette, the boy rose from the ground, claiming that he was very sorry. He tirelessly asked his stepmother for forgiveness, justifying himself by only blacking out for a second, raising his hands to the sky again. Yoha, asking for forgiveness, thought about how he had made a mistake again, and that, having angered his mother, he would not be able to get rid of it so easily. But upon closer inspection, the boy discovered that it was not his stepmother in front of him, as he had initially thought. The stranger who arrived a few hours earlier was wearing earrings that Ms. Baek Miju didn't even have. The boy was surprised both that by some miracle he had not caught the eye of his mother and of the person with whom he had been enchanted. In front of Yoha was none other than the charming daughter of the Blade Emperor, Namgung Yeon, who was looking questioningly at the young man. At the same time, there was a conversation going on in the house about the wedding with the Namgung clan, which surprised the owner of the house. Mr. Namgung wanted to become related to the Warryong house, to which Baek Miju agreed, claiming that it would be wonderful news for their children. However, the man wanted to know what his comrade personally thought about this, asking again whether he would become his family. The warrior was grateful for the offer from the Blade Emperor, but believed that it would be better if his children chose who they would be with. Despite the refusal, Comrade Jonah was not against it, because his friend's position was quite logical. The owner of the house continued, explaining that parents should not have told their children who to marry, which caused displeasure in his wife. Miju was outraged because her husband was thus devaluing their wedding of convenience and spent all his free time in the room when Baek was trying for the sake of their family. The lady suggested that the children might have liked each other, and Namgung wanted to visit them more often, so that the children would have the opportunity to get to know each other better. The woman apologized in advance for getting ahead of herself and for wanting to ask the guests for a favor. The Blade Emperor agreed to help without a second's hesitation, even before hearing about the request. Baek Miju, with a gloomy expression, asked the Namgung clan to give her son Baek some lessons. Jang Heun asked the lady what she meant because her request sounded too strange. But then Namgung clarified that the Yeon clan really didn't have its own techniques, since he wouldn't be able to solve this issue on his own. Yeon also joined the discussion, wanting to ask his comrade about the same thing, as long as it didn't embarrass him and the entire Namgung clan. Looking at his adopted brother, the man realized that he was absolutely serious in his words. Mr. Namgung agreed, asking if his friend wanted his eldest son to inherit the Nine Heavens technique. Yan replied that their techniques were not as difficult to learn as the techniques of the Namgung clan, confident that his son had already mastered his technique. However, the comrade thought it was a joke, since 6 years ago he had seen with his own eyes how the warrior used the advanced technique of the Nine Heavens. The owner of the house replied that he could not pass on his knowledge in his current state and would tell him the details later personally. John wanted to say something when the family would return to the mountain, but he didn't have time to finish his thought, cutting it off mid-sentence. And the very next moment the man suddenly began to cough violently, covering his mouth with his hand. The Blade Emperor froze at the sight he saw, asking again if everything was okay with his friend. A second later, having knocked over the cup, John fell right onto the table, which frightened those present who were calling for a doctor. Namgung tried to reach his comrade loudly, so loudly that it could even be heard from the street, ordering him to wake up. At the same time, Mai Baek, who was unaware of his father's fate, was walking around the backyard of the warring estate. Looking around, the boy wondered where the hell was the young lady Yan, with whom he had been ordered to get closer. Suddenly, the young man heard his sister's voice, tearfully begging him to ask someone one more question. The girl asked Namgung Jung if he really met his sworn enemy and killed him, which made the guy laugh. Solju replied that she read in a novel how the Azure Cloudblade killed all the enemies in its path. Slightly embarrassed, the young man replied that although that was indeed what they called him, the part about the murders was a lie. The eldest son, Jonah, came running to the couple, and his younger sister was not happy about his appearance. The guy apologized for the girl disturbing the guests, but Chon insisted that everything was fine and was unable to remember the boy's name. He then reminded them that his name was Yan Mai Baek, and his sister took the opportunity to also remind them of her name, which sounded like Solju. Then the brother and sister began to quarrel, trying to figure out which of them was rude to the dear guest, and which was very polite to him. Mai Baek started arguing with Solju right in front of Mr. Namgung's son, who was embarrassed by the whole scene. But at some point, the guy began to be touched by the way the relatives sorted out their relationships, which from the outside looked very cute. Watching Mai Baek's younger sister, the guest caught himself thinking that he wanted his Yeon to be such a cheerful girl. Suddenly the guy froze, as he realized that they had been arguing in front of Chan all this time without realizing it, because of which the eldest of the brothers bowed to the guest, offering his apologies, although he repeated once again that everything was fine. And at some point the young man asked the guest if he knew by any chance where his sister, with whom he wanted to be friends, had gone. It turned out that Chan was also looking for her, offering to go looking for her together so that when they met he could introduce them to each other. Solju claimed that Yan was unable to speak, but her brother denied these rumors as they were not entirely true. The boy replied that his sister had a heart condition, and hoped that she would soon get better when she became friends with the children of the Yan clan. The girl that everyone was trying so hard to find was in the company of Yoha all this time. The guy thought the girl was incredibly beautiful, when he suddenly remembered what his mother had told him. Miju said that important guests were coming, and judging by the stranger's clothes, she was definitely supposed to be one of the guests. Well, the boy also decided that he had done something wrong, because his stepmother had told him to stay away from important people. Still shaking, Yoha thought about what he should do, because in this way he could not escape punishment. And while the boy was thinking about how to get out of this situation, John continued to drill him with a cold gaze. Unexpectedly for himself, the boy finally let go of his hands, placing them firmly on the ground. John was surprised by the behavior of the young man, who immediately started running away from her. However, at some point, Yoha suddenly stopped, not fully realizing what had suddenly happened. It turned out that the unknown girl personally stopped the boy by grabbing him by his robe, after which she pulled the guy towards herself, causing the frail young man to immediately fall to the ground as if he had been thrown with force. Yoha lay on the ground, catching his breath, not expecting this from anyone other than his stepmother. Namgung Yeon stared at the unfamiliar boy as he apologized to her in turn. The girl saw multiple cut marks on the young man's body, and their owner continued to regret what he had done. Looking down on Yoha, the girl wondered why he kept apologizing to her, when she had only pulled him gently towards her. The Blade Emperor's daughter noted that the boy was unable to stay on his feet, suggesting that he had not studied martial arts. Without taking her eyes off the guy's bruises and scars, the girl determined that he clearly got them from no training, and on top of that, he didn't eat particularly well. From the color of his hair, Jo Hee-yoon determined that the boy was the son of the swordsman who cut the moon, which made her unable to understand why the boy was so scared. The youngest of Mr. Namgung's children sat down next to the young man who kept asking her for forgiveness. The girl carefully raised her hand as she wanted to touch the son of the great warrior. To Jo, the gesture of the stranger opposite seemed very frightening, which he associated with something bad. Baek Mi-ju's hand instantly appeared in front of the guy with razor-sharp nails that left deep cuts on his body. John's son immediately began to sweat heavily, and his breathing became intermittent as he saw the girl's hand approaching him. However, Namgung-yeon was not stupid and immediately understood what exactly was happening to the guy. But when Yoha looked at the arriving guest with frightened eyes, it was far from her image that he saw. Scenes from his past appeared in the boy's mind, where everyone and their dog made fun of him. And at the same time, the young man saw before him the claws of his stepmother, which were a terrible dream for him in reality. The girl who wanted to touch him realized that Joha had never been treated kindly. Still, Namgung-yeon put her hand on the head of the red-headed boy, who immediately froze at that moment. And when he was able to move again, he looked at the daughter of the guests who had arrived with a questioning expression on his face. The girl with a sweet face finally decided to ask the frightened boy what his name was. The boy answered, his eyes wide with surprise, that his name was Yoha, still drenched in cold sweat. Repeating the guy's name, the girl stroked his cheek, assuring him that she would definitely protect him. Unexpectedly, after the words she said, the guy clenched his teeth trying to hold back, but a tear still rolled down his cheek. Since John didn't expect such a reaction at all, she automatically took her hand away from the boy. Yoha suddenly burst into bitter tears, his face now completely covered in a stream of tears that rolled down to the ground in large drops. John, watching the guy cry loudly, looked at him with an appraising gaze, trying to figure out what to do. And in the end, Namgung decided to hug Johu because he needed support so much, and when the girl said that everything would be fine, the guy cried even more. Now John, instead of the guy, repeated the same phrase, that together with him she was under the rays of the setting sun. At some point, the daughter of the Blade Emperor extended her hand to the poor boy. The girl looked at the red-haired boy in the hope that he would decide to take her hand. John's unusual actions silenced the sobbing Yoha, whose uncomprehending eyes stared at her in silence. However, no matter how hard it was for him, which was evident because his hands were shaking, the guy put his into the girl's palm. And as soon as Joey's hand was in John's hand, the girl instantly jumped up, dragging her new acquaintance along with her. The couple headed towards a passage in the wall, which was hidden from outsiders by lushly growing bushes. The boy looked at the secret passage in the wall with horror, because he guessed what was going on. When Jan leaned forward, the young man remained standing in place and, although not immediately, still succumbed to her charms. The two children used the passage in the wall to leave the warring estate, finding themselves in a place unknown to Johe. The boy, when he saw it, couldn't believe his own eyes, since he had never been there before. It was time to find myself at a market where there were many unfamiliar people scurrying from side to side. Looking around the crowd, the boy's gaze fell on a man who was buying some food from a local merchant. It turned out that the food was meatballs on a stick, which, hanging over hot coals, gave off quite the aroma. It was this aroma that reminded Joha that he was hungry and still hadn't eaten anything. Seeing the way her new friend looked at the meatballs, Jan couldn't help but smile. And the next moment, finding herself next to the seller, the girl took 3 sticks from the satisfied man, which he was holding out to her. Hungry Joha pounced on the delicious meat, despite the fact that the food had not yet had time to cool down. His only friend, Namgung Yeon, stroked the boy's head, for whom such a display of care was new. The girl looked at the guy with a smile, which made her feel sincerely sorry for this poor boy. While walking through the market, the daughter of the Blade Emperor noticed a stranger's shadow fall on her. And when the girl returned, she noticed the blade in the man's hand. The mysterious stranger with a menacing expression on his face looked at the children, who, on top of everything else, were in the company of two other guys. Just one look at the mysterious stranger was enough to make Yoha shake with fear. But the young lady, unlike her friend, looked at the swordsman with a calm, expressionless gaze. The girl did not show her emotions, but at the same time she only squeezed the boy's hand tighter. When evening came and the moon rose in the sky, John finally woke up, which made his guests worry. Mr. Namgung, standing next to the sick man's bed, did not understand how the moon-cutting swordsman could be in such a state. The warrior said that he was ashamed that he had not been able to hold out longer. But his comrade insisted that all this was nonsense, and that he needed to focus on resting in order to recover for the sake of the clan and the children. The owner of the house asked his friend if he remembered when he was told about the clan technique that Yeon received from Guchun Hyunyo. But from then on, the warrior no longer received any benefits from her, assuming that she was disappointed by his wretchedness. And the reason for this was the death of Yeon Muryon's wife, who died that day along with her. Although the swordsman's beloved left him, she left behind a child in her place, who was an exact copy of him. But the man, despite this, believed that he had no right to see him after everything that had happened. All these years, John was afraid that he would hate him, even though he understood that the boy was not guilty of his wife's death. Mr. Namgung told his friend to stop talking such nonsense, because he didn't want to see him become such a person. Muryon, no matter how hard it was for him, leaned on his skinny arms and got out of bed. Ignoring Namgung's assurances to go back to bed, Yeon asked him for one last favor. The man understood that he had no right to ask for such a thing, but he hoped that his adopted brother would take care of his children. The head of the Namgung family ordered him to stop this kind of conversation, which he did not like. Bowing his head, Muryon said that his children were unhappy because they grew up without a father all the time. This was the last request of the great warrior, which his brother finally agreed to fulfill. And while the brothers were talking to each other, their wives were impatiently awaiting the arrival of their missing children. The guards, entering the estate with the children, announced that they had found young Mrs. Yeon, which made Jang Haeun very happy. When the woman turned to her daughter, asking where she had disappeared to, Baek Miju looked displeasedly towards the children. The lady asked the girl, who continued to hold her friend, whether she had hurt herself by any chance. Then Jang Haeun noticed a boy dressed in rags who looked like a vagabond and asked who it was with her. But the stepmother got ahead of John, rushing to her son with questions about why he looked like that, and immediately suggested that during his absence he had fought with someone. The woman asked the boy if he knew how painful it was for her to see him like this, but the young man trembled all over from just his mother's touch. Mrs. Beck, turning to the girl, said that she was extremely worried, as she had not seen her son all day. Miju wanted to thank Yeon for finding her son, but she was met with the young lady's cold, piercing gaze. By this time, the girl's older brother, Chon, had arrived, along with Mr. Muryon's children. The guy assumed that his younger sister had climbed onto one of the roofs again, which is why they couldn't find her. However, the young man was very surprised when he discovered one seemingly insignificant detail. The son of the Blade Emperor was surprised that Yeon was holding the boy's hand, which was not some kind of display of emotion on her part. Maibek also watched the young lady and spent the whole day getting to know her. Feeling a keen gaze on her, the girl instantly turned around to look into the stranger's eyes. Baek Miju's eldest son blushed when he discovered how beautiful the girl turned out to be. But then the boy immediately noticed that John was holding Joey's hand at that moment. It was a strange picture for the boy, because it was the first time he had seen his brother treated like that. Jang Haeun stated that the children were tired, suggesting that they all go inside, which Baek Mi-ju couldn't help but agree with. And at that very moment, Jo-hoo was separated from his protector, and at the same time their hands that were one in the other were separated. The mother asked the girl to go with her, unable to take her eyes off her new friend as she understood what was awaiting him. Mrs. Mi-ju told her guests that they would follow them, that she wanted to talk to her son alone first. The woman, holding the boy tightly, watched to make sure that Namgung's family moved as far away as possible so that they would not hear her words. Without turning to the boy, the stepmother said that she told him to stay away from the guests. She asked if her son wanted everyone to know that she was not his biological mother. And while the young man once again asked Baek for forgiveness, she looked into the distance, fascinated. Watching Yan leave, the woman couldn't understand what was wrong with this girl that she treated her so coldly. In the 7th month of the same year, the head of the family, Yeon Mur-young, died quietly in his sleep after falling ill. After his death, Baek Mi-ju summoned the Yeon clan, namely 21 warriors from the Baek clan, to make up for the leader's absence. These warriors eventually became known among the people as the White Tiger Squad of the House of Waryeong. After Mur-young left, his adopted brother kept his promise regarding his eldest son, Baek. The boy went to the Namgung clan to undergo training, leaving his mother, brothers, and sister alone in the house. After her eldest son left, Baek Mi-ju officially took over as the head of the Waryeong household, making no secret of the fact that she was happy with the position. A little later, in the extension of Yeon Mur-young's room, his wife was trying to find something there. The woman asked who could have done such a thing, throwing books and notebooks all over the room. When one of the members of the White Tiger Squad approached the lady, she decided that her people had found the thing she needed. Bowing his head, the warrior replied that he and his colleagues had searched every corner of the estate, but had found nothing. Choosing his words carefully, the man added that Mr. John had not left behind a single benefit. An angry Baek Mi-ju threw the book at the servant, claiming that she herself heard Namgung talking about advanced technology. The lady ordered all the things related to Yeon Mur-young to be moved to the warehouse so that she would never see them again. Bowing low, the subject of the head of the Waryeong house assured her that they would take care of everything. After leaving the room, White Tiger addressed his people, announcing that everyone in the estate was to immediately gather in front of the building. But the woman immediately called out to her subordinate, ordering them to do something else while cleaning. She wanted the warriors to lock Muryan's son and things in the warehouse, hoping that she would not have to explain her order. The man did not like the mistress's order, but he understood that he could not disobey it, no matter what it was. No matter how much Yoha begged for mercy, confessing all his sins, the warrior still threw him into the barn. The White Tiger participant explained to the boy that from now on, this room would be his new room. Lady Mi-ju's servant asked them not to hold a grudge against them, as they had to do so if they wanted to survive. But for the boy, these excuses meant nothing, and his stepmother's subordinates insisted that they could not help him in any way. The man who left him in the warehouse told the boy to honor the death of his father, who was now with his souvenirs. Yoha continued to beg the White Tigers for help, despite the fact that the door had finally closed in front of him. Leaning against the door, the young man lowered his head, finally realizing that he had been left here alone. The boy began to cry quietly, but suddenly stopped when he heard a mysterious creak behind him. Turning around, Yoha looked at his late father's things, in which his spirit seemed to still hover. Tucked his legs under himself, continuing to cry quietly. The guy didn't like this place, because he was very scared here. He kept wondering how long he would have to sit here, since he had nowhere to expect help from. The boy spent the whole night in the barn, and unable to cry any longer, he fell asleep, exhausted, right on the floor. Yoha was awakened by the sound of a door that had been in the wall of the barn opening slightly. Holding out a plate of food, the man's voice outside explained that it was the prisoner's breakfast. Looking at the bowl of water and a piece of bread, the poor boy could not believe that he would finally be able to eat. Since the young man was very hungry, he pounced on the bun with gusto, which at first seemed very tasty to him. But as soon as Yoha got a good taste of it, it became disgusting to him because it was as hard as stone. Dreaming of normal food, the boy discovered a strange glow among a pile of junk. The guy convinced himself that he had definitely seen something sparkle among the things, even though the glow had now disappeared. Leaving his piece of bread once more, Yoha headed to that place, because with the onset of morning he was no longer so afraid. Coming closer to that place, the boy again discovered a bright glow that was peeking out from under a pile of things. Having cleared a place, the boy leaned on a large board, from under which this mysterious light was shining. Throwing the board on the floor, Yoha discovered a giant mirror that was as tall as a man. When examining his find, the barn dweller could not see anything in it, because the mirror was completely covered in dust. Even when he leaned close to it, the boy couldn't see anything in it. The young man had no choice but to thoroughly clean the mirror from the dust that had stuck to it. And only after Yoha wiped the surface of the mirror did it begin to shine with its former brilliance. For the first time in a long time, the boy saw himself in the reflection, realizing that he looked like a tramp. Looking at himself, he asked his reflection if he too had been abandoned here. But suddenly, not believing his eyes, he noticed something unusual, which surprised him greatly. The reflection in the mirror suddenly leaned to the side, looking at Yoha with curiosity. And while the boy in the looking glass was smiling happily, the guy in the barn was breaking out in a cold sweat. The boy screamed, begging for help, but the guard who was next to the scad did not pay any attention to him. Following the onset of autumn, a cold winter began, and the guards guarding Yoha wondered whether the boy had frozen to death. One of the guards assured his colleague that the boy was alive because he kept screaming. This was also evidenced by the fact that each time someone ate the food, which could mean that the blood of the master himself really did flow in the young man. The White Tiger participant praised Yoha, calling him a tough guy because in his place he would have frozen long ago. However, his colleague believed that the guy did not have much time left, since his portion had been cut significantly. Watching the barn, one of the men said with regret that they would soon have to remove the body. Baek Miju's unloved son huddled in a corner, shivering from the bitter cold that penetrated the room. And while the guy was trying to warm up, his reflection in the mirror was waving her arms, trying to attract attention. Shivering from the terrible cold, Yoha asked his double not to distract him, since he had already stopped being afraid of him. After which, the boy added that he simply had no strength left to be afraid, feeling that he would soon die from the cold. Just a second ago, the reflection, which had been moving energetically, froze in place after these words. Sighing, Yoha, who was in the mirror, began to pace back and forth, thinking hard about something. But in the end, the reflection couldn't think of anything better than to pick up the stick lying on the floor. The boy, trapped in the mirror, continued to attract attention to himself, but now he was waving a piece of wood in his hand. He succeeded in this, since Yoha, flushed from the cold, nevertheless devoted a little of his time to the reflection. Looking at his copy jumping in the mirror, the guy asked why he suddenly started dancing. However, the boy watched his doubles dance without interest, because he had no interest in it. At first, the boy was surprised, but quickly realized that the creature would not be able to leave the mirror, which is why he stopped being afraid of it. Yoha was convinced that his reflection behaved this way precisely because it demanded the attention of strangers. True, at some point the boy's movements in the mirror turned from a dance into clear and sharp ones, reminiscent of blows. This was especially clearly seen in the movement that Joey's reflection showed at the end. Without looking away from the mirror, it seemed to the young man that the movements he was observing were familiar to him. And literally the next moment, the guy recognized in them the family art of the Nine Heavens sword, which his brothers had studied. While observing the double, Yoha realized that his copy's movements were identical to those he had seen earlier. But the boy did not understand how the creature locked in the mirror knew the art of his clan. The boy remembered the teacher's words, who insisted that it was necessary to use the Nine Heavens sword technique correctly. Only in this case will a person be able to control his internal energy and create yang energy with its help. The ability to create and maintain this energy was the first step to mastering sword technique. Yoha, having dug into his memories, remembered that Maibek could surround himself with warm air even in winter. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror detected some movement on the other side, in the barn. The copy was very surprised when its owner began to exactly repeat the movement he had shown. When the guy in the mirror lowered the stick upward, the boy in the frozen room did exactly the same. The reflection looked at Yoha without hiding its displeasure, since it did not understand why the guy repeated so ineptly. The young man asked not to look at him like that, because if he had a choice, he would not have thought of doing something like that. The boy had to at least try, because if he continued to sit in one place, he would definitely freeze to death. By imitating his copy, the boy hoped that it showed the true movements of the family art, because in this case, Yoha, having mastered the technique, will be able to resist the cold and survive this frosty winter. However, as soon as the young man thought about this, he immediately stumbled and fell to the floor with a crash, dropping his stick. Since the reflection could not communicate with the prisoner of the warehouse, it indicated with a gesture that he was a loser, which could not help but anger Muryan's son. Winter continued, and along with its endless frosts, so did Johi's training. The boy, who at the very beginning had barely held the stick, now swung it confidently and clearly. His movements could be compared to those of his older brother, who once practiced the family art. Along with the movements of his hands, the boy's legs also underwent changes, so that they stood firmly on the ground. And while Yoha was using the Nine Heavens sword technique, his double was watching him from the mirror the whole time. The creature, who looked like two peas in a pod with the boy, looked appraisingly at its prototype. Tired and wet, the boy realized that he could master the family art, which was now not at all cold. Waving a stick, the guy claimed that these technical movements allow warm air to develop around. The acquired skill was enough for him to maintain heat for a long time and survive the winter. But the reflection in the mirror again tried to attract attention to itself, frantically waving its arms, as if it wanted to say something. The creature imprisoned in the looking-glass waved its stick with a firm movement in order to show its strength. The reflection burst into flames, but Yoha replied that he didn't need such a powerful technique. The boy added that he had not originally intended to repeat all of his double's movements and was content with the fact that he would be able to warm up. Throwing the stick into the air, the boy said that he no longer had a reason to watch his copy's annoying movements. Yoha wondered out loud whether he could now turn the mirror towards the wall since he no longer needed it. But when he turned around to look at his reflection, he saw that it began to move faster than usual. The movements of the double were different from those he had shown before when he was teaching the boy sword techniques. Baek Miju's unloved son couldn't hide his interest as he watched the reflection's movements with curiosity. Soon, the double demonstrated a technique that Yoha did not know about, suggesting that it might be something else. And at some point, the guy realized that the creature in the mirror was teaching him something completely different from the family art of the Sword of the Nine Heavens. The question then remained open as to what the copy was actually showing the guy, who claimed he wasn't interested in it at all. Watching as the reflection finished its demonstration, the young man declared that he did not need to learn martial arts. The boy asked again if the creature really thought that he would actually repeat these complex movements after him. This statement threw the double off his stride, as he believed that he had managed to awaken Joe's interest in these techniques. Realizing that his plan had not worked, the reflection decided to switch to a tried and tested method and began to tease Muryan's son. This behavior, like last time, worked perfectly because the guy said that some creature could not have been laughing at him. Taking a stance, the guy asked if his copy doubted that he would not repeat the movements shown, insisting that he would not only cope, but would do it many times better. Time passed, and with it, the cold winter gave way to spring, melting the remaining snow along with the frost. By this time, John Joha had already mastered the very technique that he had not originally intended to learn. Armed with only a stick, the young man still looked quite intimidating using this technique. But after performing it, he tried to catch his breath, since it was more difficult for him than the previous movement shown by his double. Having repeated them over and over again, the guy still managed to copy them from the creature in the mirror. However, what followed next, namely the huge explosion, the boy could not manage to do, no matter what he did. Yoha looked at this technique and understood that he would never be able to do it exactly the same way, no matter how much he trained. The guy on the other side was mocking the barn prisoner because, as much as Yoha was sorry to admit it, he couldn't understand how it was done. And so, in despair, the young man sat down on the floor, cursing, wondering how he could repeat something like that. But trying to repeat such a complex technique, the boy lost a lot of strength, and because of this became very hungry, which he now regretted. He considered it a waste of time since this technique would not help him in any way. However, at the same time, the double who performed it looked incomparable at that very moment, which attracted people to study the technique. Angry Yoha realized that although it was pointless, he wanted to learn to do exactly the same. The boy wondered why he couldn't do it, because even though the complex movements were complex, he still couldn't understand their essence. When the guy mentally compared them with the movements that were shown earlier, he realized that he could trace the similarity of some elements in them. However, this also raised the question of why they were an order of magnitude more difficult, meaning that this martial art was more advanced than the Nine Heavens technique. John Yoha had never seen the brothers practice these movements in their training. It was obvious that they were related to the art of the Yan clan, but the boy did not understand how the creature knew about them. Then the young man asked the reflection if it was hiding something on purpose, because he exactly repeated absolutely everything after it, but something was still missing. Since the double could not speak, he responded by smiling broadly, baring his teeth to his friend. The fact that his copy was so petty angered Murian's son, who intended to respond in kind. And the next moment, the boy threw a sheet over the mirror, declaring that he would stop looking at it, and with that, he would stop studying. But at the very bottom of the mirror, there remained an uncovered place where, bending down, Yoh's double appeared again with an offended face. The guy asked if the reflection really wanted to teach him so much, to which he nodded affirmatively. Taking pity on his copy, the young man removed the sheet, demanding that she no longer lie to him, otherwise next time he would cover him, but forever. Pleased with his student's decision, the boy in the mirror pointed his finger upward. Not understanding what the double wanted from him this time, the boy raised his head, discovering something strange. Above Yoha's reflection in the mirror, hieroglyphs written as if in gold began to appear. Looking at them, the guy did not fully understand what kind of phrase they formed, what appeared before his eyes. The boy was poorly trained, so he read syllable by syllable, saying the phrase, "True mirror of the goddess Gucheon." At that very moment, the 900 words that were hidden inside the true mirror appeared before Yeon Muryeong's son. Even an ordinary boy, for whom they were too deep and complex, felt the meaning of these words penetrate his head. Thus the young man realized that the art he was trying to replicate was called the Sword of the 9 Heavenly Spheres. For as long as he could remember, he had been bullied by the clan, and his life had been a misery that was destined to end in death in the warehouse. But it was this evil fate that led poor Joe to a fateful meeting with the mirror of Gucheon Hyunyo, who began to rethink his existence. The members of the White Tiger Order considered the child abandoned by its mother to be dead, and over time they stopped properly guarding it. And when the guards tried to add food to the prisoner who was locked up in the warehouse, they were met with disapproval from their mistress. At this time, her eldest son was studying the art of the Namgung clan with all his might. The secret teachings of the technique, which until now were thought to be lost due to the death of Yeon Muryeong, were in fact not lost. They were slowly but surely comprehended by the new owner, who was the successor of the line, John, son of Joe. Summer had arrived outside, and along with the transformed nature, the boy locked in the barn was also transformed. In this room, Yoha was supposed to drag out a miserable existence awaiting his death, but fate decreed otherwise. The warehouse became a perfect place for him to concentrate on training the 9 Heavenly Realm sword technique without any distractions. Time passed, and the guy who was once unable to stand up for himself moved to a new level, mastering the technique of meditation. During the meditation, the boy was all aglow, radiating powerful energy that was given to him by the martial art technique. And the master, who taught the young man without leaving his fragile refuge, kept an eye on his students' achievements. Joe's intimidated look changed to one that was more stern and confident, reflecting the kind of person he had become. The swing of the stick created a large shockwave, driving the mountain of dust that had accumulated over so much time around the closed room. Despite the gender, the boy trained barefoot all this time, his feet becoming rough and his legs hard as rocks. Day after day, year after year, the boy trained until 10 years of his training flew by unnoticed. And only after this time, he was able to announce to the teacher that now his movements were just like his own. A carriage was approaching Luoyang, carrying a man who had not been to his hometown for a very long time. Upon entering Luoyang, the carriage passed the warring estate, and the horse's hooves clattered to announce its arrival to everyone. Having reached the main gate, the transport creaked its wheels and stopped, and its door swung open. The guy who got out of the cart said mysteriously, "Could it really be that 10 years had passed since the last time he was here?" Mrs. Miju rushed to meet him with open arms, happy about her son's return. The woman noted that he returned very courageous, assuring her that she had missed him greatly during his absence. A brother and sister came to meet their relative, for whom meeting their older brother was a surprise. The guy, looking at his family, was glad to finally return to his home, which he also had managed to miss very much. The young warrior officially announced to his mother that he had finished training after 10 years, which made Baek Miju very proud. The woman kept repeating how courageous her son had become, declaring that, from now on, the Warung estate would become the strongest in Luoyang, if not in the entire Henan province. The mother, experiencing a surge of emotions, said that she had been too focused on her firstborn. Mrs. Beck noticed that guests from the Namgung clan had also arrived with Mai Beck, apologizing for the cost of meeting her son. According to the lady, Chong had become stronger, and there was no one in Jianghu who did not know the name of the Azure Cloud Blade. After which, the woman for some time lingered her gaze on his sister, who in the past had not shown herself in the best light. The lovely Yan became even more beautiful, changing beyond recognition, compared to which the other girls were just withered flowers. The clan leader was sure that everyone was tired after the long journey, so she had already prepared rooms for them. While Baek Miju was inquiring about Mr. Namgung's health, his daughter was turning her head from side to side. When the mistress of the house noticed this, she asked the girl who she was so persistently looking for, but Yan ignored her question. John Namgung was surprised when his sister walked past Miju, asking her why she was so rude to the lady. The woman replied that everything was fine, citing the fact that the girl's illness, which had not yet been cured, was to blame. But the brother assured that his sister had become much better, and the mistress of the house decided to quickly bring the guests to the estate. The woman walked behind, watching as the brother and sister talked with Mai Beck, whom they had not seen for a long time. Stopping near the guards, the woman approached one of them with some kind of assignment. She asked the guard to tell everyone that the members of the White Tiger should not let Namgung Yeon anywhere near the garden. The lady claimed that the girl was looking for a meeting with Yoha, that she should not have allowed them to meet, while noting at the same time John's steadfastness. Baek Miju's subject couldn't find the time to report that he had decided to check the warehouse last night because it was too quiet. As a result, the guard said that he did not find Yok there, and the guard's statement was like a lightning strike for the stepmother. Grabbing the servant by the throat, the woman at first did not believe the words spoken, ordering him to tell her everything he knew about this incident. This misfortune happened the day before at sunset, when the sun was already setting below the horizon. Around the abandoned warehouse, rising in the air from the boy's training, gripping the stick tightly, Yoha concentrated all his energy into it, creating a real whirlwind from the airflow. Exhaling, the young man swung his weapon with force, sending out a powerful shockwave in all directions. The technique that the boy learned, using only air, destroyed the empty boxes left in the warehouse. The student announced that after several years of long and persistent training, he had finally managed to master this technique. Johha couldn't be happier that he executed the kick perfectly, as it was an extremely difficult move for him. Turning to the mirror, he asked his reflection if it had witnessed his triumph. The guy kept insisting that he had performed the technique perfectly, which the creature agreed with and joyfully applauded the student. The young man said that when he remembered all 900 words that were shown to him, he also understood the part that he was missing to advance. Inspired by this success, Muryan's son asked the double to teach him the next technique. The little copy of the boy pointed upward again, just as it had once shown him the writing. But when the guy raised his head up, he discovered a hole in the ceiling that he had made with his blow. The sun penetrating into the dark barn was so beautiful that it captivated the young student from the first seconds. It impressed the young man so much that he involuntarily threw down the stick, which he had not parted with for 10 years. The being that lived in the mirror of Gucheon Hyungnyo was pleased that his disciple was ready to leave this place. For John, who spent many years in a dark and dusty warehouse, the presence of light was something distant and unknown. The guy looked with enchantment at the beautiful view of the sky, as well as the warmth of the sun, which he had managed to forget. All this time, while studying martial arts, the young man never even thought that he could leave this place. The reflection in the mirror smiled contentedly as it watched Joey's first steps in a new world for him. Pausing at the hole in the ceiling that he had made with his strike, the wielder of the 9 Heavens sword technique froze in indecision. However, after some doubts, curiosity finally got the better of him, and the guy's hand stuck through the hole. Once on the roof, Yoha kept his eyes closed at first, as the direct sunlight was too bright for him. But when the guy opened his eyes, a wonderful view of the city opened up before him, complemented by the sun setting over the horizon along with the birds. Admiring the at first glance unremarkable landscape, the young man, who saw something like this for the first time in a long time, considered it all incredibly beautiful. The little version of Johi that had been in the looking glass all this time suddenly disappeared. She was replaced by the owner of this mirror, Lady Gucheon Hyunyo, who had been teaching Muryong's son all this time. Turning to the hole in the ceiling, the guy said what a beautiful view there was from here. He wanted his friend, his copy when he was little, to also rise up and look at the landscape with him. But when he looked at the magical object, Yoha did not find his teacher there, which had turned into an ordinary mirror. The young man was shocked that his only friend, with whom he had spent all these several years of captivity, had left. The guy continued to look at the sunset, thinking that now he was truly alone in this world. With a bang, Mrs. Baek Miju opened the doors of the warehouse where she had once locked her husband's son. But the woman found nothing there except the fragments of old boards that remained after Joey's training. The head of the house's attention was drawn to the sunlight that was penetrating the room through a hole in the ceiling. Baek Miju asked her men if lightning had struck the warehouse, unable to figure out how the guy had managed to climb so high. The White Tiger participants asked the owner if they should send out a search party, but she rejected the idea. The woman explained that it was not worth wasting time on an ungrateful boy who had abandoned the clan that had fed him all this time. She was sure that the boy would not change anything by running away, since he remained a 6-year-old child in an adult body. The stepmother was sure that, not knowing how this world works, Yoha would begin to starve, get sick, and die alone. Maibek asked his mother if his brother had really left home, to which she replied that the search party had been unable to find him. The boy insisted that Joha was not the type to run away from home, but Beck decided that the boy was upset when he heard about the return of his brother, who had succeeded in his studies. Miju insisted that after her son withdrew into himself, no one could understand what was happening to him, which Maibek didn't really believe. The boy was surprised to discover that his adopted elder sister had not dined with the others, which made the lady wary. The girl became reserved and silent when she heard about the disappearance of her old friend. His stepmother assured the guest that there was no need to worry so much about Yok, because he was simply at that age when people like to run away from home. But the lady's words had no effect on Jan, who still treated her coldly, as she knew her true nature. According to her, the guy left the house 3 days ago, but there wasn't a single speck of dust on the furniture, as if it had just been cleaned before they arrived, while the rest of the room was completely unattended, indicating that there were no signs of human life in it.